All right, well, this video is going to give you some guidance on numbers 4 and 5 found on page 377 in your Quantway core textbook. And stick with me because things get a little hairy with these questions. All right, well, what number 4 asks you to do is write out the steps you use to answer number 3. So, you plugged some values into a formula, did some math, and got an answer. And so when you simplified your formula, hopefully you got something like this here. This is what you end up with if you plug in the values for this 120-year-old male who drank 3 beers. So what are the steps? So in other words, let's say, let me do for example, let's say we wanted to plug in 3 for time. That's one of the hour intervals we were asked to calculate. So if we were going to calculate the B, what would the steps be that we would follow to get there? Well, the first thing we do is we're starting with the 3. We have a value for the 3. So we're going to start with a value for t. Okay, so that's the first step. So we get that 3, we plug it in. What's the first thing we do with it? Well, we do this multiplication, right? You would multiply by this negative 0.015. Multiply by negative 0.015. Okay, so once you did that, that would become one nice number, one nice negative number. And the next thing you do, the only thing left to do, is to add this over here. So you would add 0.1044. So then all of your right side, your whole entire right side here, would be one nice clean number. So that would be your B, or your blood alcohol content. So you end with a value for B. So you start with a T, put it through some steps here, and you end up with a B. So that's what they're looking for at number 4. So number 5, before I talk about number 5 directly, I'm going to show you something that will help you get there. All right, to help us with this next problem, I've made up a hypothetical little problem here and illustrated it with a simple little map. There are 2 friends, Thelma and Frank, and they like to go visit each other. So I'm going to write down the directions they follow to get from one house to the other. So let's first start with Thelma. So this is Thelma who's going to go and visit her friend. So the first thing she does is she goes up this way and she travels north. So she goes north 3 miles. Then she turns right and she goes east 5 miles, right? And then she ends with Frank. Okay, so she has a nice time with Frank, has some dinner, they hang out a little bit, maybe watch something on Netflix, but eventually it's time to go home. So here's what she's got to do. She's got to go back home. So she is starting with Frank at this point. She's starting at Frank's house. And so now she's going to go back this way. So she's not going east like she did when she got there. She's going west. So she goes west 5 miles. And then she takes a left turn and she goes south 3 miles. And then at the end, she ends at her own home. So basically, I did 2 sets of steps. one of them undid the other one. So in other words, when she went to Frank's, she took a bunch of instructions, she did a bunch of moves, but she wanted to get home, so she had to undo everything she did to get there. And if you look at these two lists, you notice that a couple things about them. One is that this goes from Thelma to Frank, and the other one goes from Frank to Thelma. They go in opposite directions. And we look at the steps, this step with Thelma down here, and this step with Thelma up here, and we notice that here we're ending, and here we're starting. So starting and ending are kind of opposites. And then on the trip home, she goes south 3 miles, but on the trip there, she went north 3 miles. So again, opposites. On the trip home, she went west. On the trip there, she went east. On the trip home, she started with Frank. On the trip there, she ended with Frank. So clearly, not only is the order of the list reversed, but each one of the steps is the opposite. So we have to do two things to undo a list like this. So let's see how this helps us with our equation. All right, so here is our formula again, and here are the steps we took when we plugged in a value. But if you take a look at number 5, it asks, how long will it take for this student's blood alcohol content to be 0.08, the legal limit? So the difference here is they're giving us a value for B. We have the answer already. So let's start with B. And they're asking how much time will it take for his blood alcohol content to reach this level. So we're starting with B, and since the question is asking about time, we hope to end with a t value. So we see already how this is kind of similar to the situation with Thelma and Frank. Here we ended with B, here we started with B. Here we ended with T. Here we're starting with T. So to fill in these missing steps, we know just what to do. We're going to go up this list in a reverse tortative direction, except we're going to do down here. And as we copy these steps over, we're going to do them opposite, just like we did with these two already. So the thing that comes up, the next step up the line here, is that we add 0.1044. So the opposite of adding 0.1044 is subtracting. 0.1044. So that's the first thing we're going to do here. Subtract 0.1044. And then we keep going up, and we see the next thing that we did was we multiplied by negative 0.015. So now we're going to divide by negative 0.015. So if we follow these steps, with the information they give us, because they're giving us a 0.08, if we follow these steps here, that should get us our t. We already followed these steps over here when we answered number 3. And now to do number 5, now that we've reversed the steps, we have a roadmap for getting to the answer.